Frankie and Nate are childhood sweethearts but don't like each other after many years apart. When they're forced to work in the vineyard they both apparently own, they try to deal with their issues. Frankie Baldwin finds Glo Sorrento on her way to the hardware store. Glo shows Frankie that Nate DeLuca is back in town. His mother, Carla, is thrilled since she never expected him to be back. Glo remembers something that happened between him and Frankie in the past. Frankie pretends she barely remembers their relationship, since that was in high school. Yeah, right. Frankie admits she shared her first kiss with Nate when he was much shorter. They were like Romeo and Juliet of the Valley, who just went their separate ways. This reminds Glo of her divorce papers just coming in. She's happy to be single again and hopes to find another man. Glo admits she's selling her Sorrento farm because her ex-husband, Sam, obviously can't harvest the grapes from a beach. Good point. She doesn't have the heart to harvest anymore, but Frankie assures her she will be fine. Nate prepares his speech as a judge for the grape jelly competition that night. He apparently joined when he heard Frankie was judging it too. He reminds her of the time he showed up at her place with 5 dozen sunflowers. She also reminds him they were from her own garden. Sounds sweet. Frankie wonders how long he's staying in town till he pursues another degree. Seems like an attack. Nate has already earned his PhD from Cornell and feels like his education is done. He wants to join his DeLuca family clan again so he can compete with Frankie's family. He has heard that her family, the Baldwins, are already geared up for the best wine at the festival. As Frankie tastes the grape jelly, Hannah wonders if she's nervous about Nate being back. Hannah was dating Mark's brother, Marco, but is done with him now. Hannah remembers Frankie and Nate had serious sparks and wonders if they will rekindle the old flame. We do too. Frankie is not interested, and even Marco comes to win Hannah back. She ignores him completely, and Marco's other brother, Gabe, is sure he has lost his chance. Carla welcomes the guests to the St. Madeleine Autumn Harvest Festival as the co-chair. She explains the ongoing family rivalry between the DeLucas and the Baldwins. They're both Northern California's premier grape growers and are always competing. She's hosting the event with her co-chair, Charles Baldwin, who is Frankie's father. Carla announces the judges, including Frankie and Nate. The best jelly has been awarded to Marilee, but neither Frankie nor Nate voted for her. They assume it must be because of Mel, who has always had a thing for Marilee, something they agree on. Frankie rants about how Marilee's jelly tastes like turmeric. Nate gets nervous when Marilee walks in behind her, so he kisses Frankie to shut her up. Everyone gasps, and Carla assumes that seems to be the end of the feud between the two families. It doesn't look like it from Frankie's expression. Nate tries to explain why he kissed her, but Frankie doesn't let him. She assumes he wants to get back with her and embarrass her in front of everyone. He assures her he doesn't want that, but she feels he's too full of himself. At least hear him out. Frankie hears Charles talking on the phone with someone for a loan. Frankie wonders if he's stressed about something, but Charles claims that he is an annoying vendor. That's believable, surely. Frankie wants to share something with Charles, but he brings up their past disagreements about the vineyard. He claims he needs to make some tough decisions and has appointed someone with a solid business background to run Baldwin Farms. He introduces her to Tony, who will run the farm alongside him. Frankie's brother Jonah feels Charles should have been more considerate of her. Frankie has looked up Tony and knows he has a good wine business background. She still feels she deserves to take over the farm from Charles. Jonah suggests Frankie should consider other options, but working in a vineyard is her dream. Jonah also heard about her kiss with Nate and assured her he was there for her. Nate finds Frankie in a store to explain that he was trying to spare Marilee's feelings. Frankie feels he hurt her feelings instead by kissing her. Well, this is complicated. He offers to take her out for lunch, but she ignores him. Hannah feels Frankie's rants about Nate seem strangely familiar from high school. Frankie insists that was in the past, and now she just wants to get rid of him. She doesn't know what she's doing with her life, so Hannah decides to give her a haircut for a fresh start, because that will help. Frankie stops by Sorrento Farms and loves it. She finds Glo at her diner and knows she wants to sell it to someone who cares for it. Glo has heard about Charles hiring someone else, but Frankie feels that's the push she needs to start her own vineyard. She wants to buy Sorrento for herself and knows how much it costs. She has some savings and her mom's trust to pay for it. Her mom was Glo's best friend, and she was always kind to her. Frankie also needs a loan, but she has been rejected by banks. She's waiting to hear from some other lenders but promises to find a way to pay her. Glo wants to finance the sale for Frankie since her mom was also her very close friend. Frankie talks to Charles about how he has taught her to take bold risks. She admits she's starting her own vineyard at Sorrento. Charles knows she's offended because he hired Tony, but tries to explain that she wanted someone with business experience. Frankie claims she understands and just wants to move on now. She knows Sorrento's grapes need a lot more attention before the harvest. Charles lets her go but doesn't seem too happy. That didn't go well. Frankie rants to Jonah about how Charles is making her feel guilty. Jonah knows Charles will come around since he wasn't happy when Jonah initially left the farm too. Let's hope so. Glow helps Frankie with the paperwork and officially hands over Sorrento to her. Frankie is excited about her first day at the farm, but gets scared when she runs into a llama. She drops her phone with Jonah still on the call, but Nate also starts teasing her about the llama, called Mittens. What a nice name. Nate claims he has full rights over Sorrento. How did that happen? Frankie feels Nate has no idea about growing grapes, but he reminds her his family has a huge history of harvesting them. Jonah comes to check on her, and Frankie asks him to arrest Nate for stealing her property. Sounds too much like a high school tiff. Jonah asks them to sort that out with lawyers instead. Glow assures Judge Jerry Prickett that she got full ownership of the vineyard in her divorce settlement with Sam. Jerry can tell Frankie seems like the legal owner, but Nate's paperwork is also legal. Wow, what a solution! Nate bought the farm from Sam, who was also the owner. Glow has tried to contact Sam and his lawyer, but they're both missing. Just what we need. Nate gets impatient about his vineyard, but Jerry reminds him this behavior won't work in a courtroom. Jerry knows only a divorce court can clarify which one of Frankie and Nate legally owns the farm. Nate is afraid that will take weeks, till which time the vines will wither away. Jerry advises them as a friend to figure this out themselves. There's nothing friendly about this fight. Nate tries to buy Frankie out, but she doesn't budge. Jerry tries to make them understand how important this last month is for harvesting a good yield from the farm. He suggests they should co-manage the property till a solution presents itself. I highly doubt that. They refuse to work with each other, so Jerry suggests they split it so Frankie can take the south parcel while Nate takes the north. Seems like a good bet. He asks them to harvest the grapes on their sides till there's a resolution in court. Frankie is worried about sharing the vineyard with Nate. Hannah reminds her she needs to stay at the farm so Nate doesn't ruin her grapes too. This motivates Frankie because she knows she can't let him have all 20 acres. It looks like a dirty fight. Glow and Carla join Jerry at the diner to discuss the vineyard. They're fascinated about a Baldwin and DeLuca feud again in the next generation. These things don't go easily. Jerry wants to eat at a different table, while Glow and Carla speculate about the vineyard. Good decision. Frankie takes a room at the farm, but Nate also arrives behind her. He even starts setting up his stuff in the kitchen. He wants to take the bedroom she took because it comes under his north parcel. She angrily takes her stuff to the other room, which is a huge mess. She asks Jonah for a favor and gets tape so they can divide the kitchen area too. We love it when things get petty. Nate gloats about Frankie having the bad room when she reminds him he's on her side of the kitchen. He also noticed that she came to his side of the tape to use the only bathroom on the property. This is getting intense. She agrees to let him use the kitchen once for every time she uses the bathroom. He points out how prickly she is, but she doesn't want to be bothered by him. When Frankie is working on the harvest, she knows he's watching her. She gets scared of his drone following her and asks him to keep his toys away. She knows he uses such techniques so he doesn't have to get his shoes dirty. He is very clean. Nate prefers a more comfortable method to capture the vineyard's progress, while Frankie wants to get her hands dirty. He feels her methods are too old school, but she thinks of harvesting grapes as an art form. They decide to grow grapes their own way, and he reminds her he has studied the sensory qualities of wine. Frankie has a Bachelor of Science too, but she doesn't think that makes her less worthy. This feud is not going anywhere. Nate goes through his family's papers and feels the business is going great. They have great sales, and even the profits have been reinvested wisely. His brothers, Marco and Gabe, ask about what Nate is doing with Sorrento. Nate is hoping he gets complete ownership of the farm and doesn't understand why Frankie left Baldwin. Marco knows from Hannah that Frankie and her dad haven't been seeing eye to eye on things for months. They are sure Nate will win Sorrento since the DeLucas are apparently born to win. Too much confidence. Carla is glad to see all her boys back home. Frankie uses Hannah's bathroom for a shower, so Nate doesn't get extra kitchen privileges. She knows it's petty, but it satisfies her to torture him. It's kind of obvious. She doesn't like how cheerful he is and how everything is about science for him. She's also frustrated he took the better room since it's on his side. She knows they're stuck with each other but is worried because Sorrento is her dream. She doesn't want to risk her future with the farm and hand it over to Nate. Frankie knows Nate is confident, but she has another trick up her sleeve. She shows Hannah that she has been creating her own Cabernet Sauvignon wine that no one knows about. Well, that's a pleasant surprise. She has rented a space for the barrels and has been at it for 5 years. Hannah feels it tastes great and that she should inform Charles about this. Frankie has always floated this idea with him, but Charles always asks her to be patient. Hannah is sure this wine will surely kickstart her future. Frankie doesn't understand why Nate is being nice and offering food to her. Nate admits it's because he wants Sorrento from her. Frankie feels the court should decide that, but Nate suggests there's a better way to do it. He thinks if they agree among themselves, they don't need to take this to court. Fair enough. He suggests setting up a challenge, and the winner can get fair ownership of Sorrento. They decide to work on their part of the vineyard with their methods for the next 2 weeks. The one with the biggest yield of grapes at the time of harvest will win the competition. Frankie is sure there's a catch, and Nate explains he just wants to prove that his scientific methods work. Neither of them is going down without a fight. Frankie agrees to the deal, and they start working. Carla knows Charles isn't happy with Frankie leaving Baldwin and thinks she would have stayed if Charles promoted her. Charles knows Frankie can make her own decisions, and asks if Carla sees an advantage in this situation. Carla is just glad Nate decided to move back home and feels like he's doing Frankie a favor by competing with her. Carla feels Frankie will come back to Baldwin soon, but Charles asks her not to underestimate Frankie. It seems like he's not so bad after all. They still make a friendly bet about which one of their kids will win the farm. When will this feud end? Nate has made sandwiches for Frankie too, since food and family are part of his Italian heritage. Frankie feels she might be in trouble if his vines are as great as his food. No doubt there. Nate has checked out her part of the farm and already knows her grapes are looking good. They laugh about how they've ended up competing with each other for a small vineyard. He wonders what happened to them, but Frankie feels they just drifted apart because of college. Nate asks about the differences they had before that when Frankie disappeared. She thinks it must have been something to do with their family feud. She's not very convincing. Nate also hates the family feud, so he suggests they should team up and represent Sorrento together. They can start with the grape-picking relay race, and Glow knows they will like them representing it. Frankie also likes the idea of fighting the stupid feud, and they toast to Sorrento. They seem cordial enough. Nate admits he has thought about her a lot since he didn't see her for long. She jokes about him coming to the class reunion for that, but he insists this is not about the past. Frankie gets a little awkward and fluttery and decides to retire for the night. Is there some hidden chemistry we're missing? She wakes up to a smoothie he makes for her. She could get used to this. Nate asks for tips to make his grapes better. He claims he's just curious to know how they did in ancient times. She admits she uses wettable sulfur to control mildew. He feels that will wash away during summer showers, so she should try newer synthetic sprays. She gets irritated by this suggestion and feels they should stick to their own methods. Good call. They soon realize Mittens is attacking their water pump and try to stop him. The pump is ruined, and Nate knows it won't get them through the harvest. Frankie can't afford a new one, but Nate suggests splitting the cost. She doesn't have that too, but he reminds her they won't have a harvest without the water line. That doesn't look good. Frankie rants to Hannah about what Mittens did. Hannah feels the timing is fishy, especially with Nate suggesting she contribute to a new pump. Hannah feels Nate must have busted the pump himself to put her in trouble. That surely seems likely. After spending time with Marco, Hannah feels all DeLucas are alike and have a hidden agenda. Are we sure this is not about Marco? Hannah still insists that DeLucas is always planning something. She asks Frankie to fight back and not give in to Nate's charms. It will be hard to do that with the food he makes. The DeLucas host a wine broker, Susan, and are glad she's dining with them. Jonah pulls Frankie up and reminds her she needs help with Nate. Frankie feels she can handle Nate herself. Of course she can. Susan admits she loves being courted by wine growers like the DeLucas. Nate is just glad she's doing business and buying from the DeLuca family. Susan asks him about Sorrento, which Nate feels shows great promise. Marco is sure Nate will turn Sorrento into the finest boutique vineyard. Nate is a little worried about his ownership, even if Marco knows Frankie doesn't have the experience or resources to grow good crops. That is below the belt. Nate takes Frankie's side and assures Susan that she knows her stuff. Frankie tries to ask Mittens about what actually happened with the pump. I'm sure there's some answer in him. Marco reminds Nate they're trying to land Susan as a buyer and not endorse Frankie. Nate still feels they don't need to downgrade Frankie's skills to make the deal. Marco thinks something else is going on between Nate and Frankie and doesn't think they're competitors. We don't either. As Nate is installing a new pump, Frankie reminds him she can't afford it. He insists she can pay him back later, but she refuses to be in debt to him. She feels he will hold it over her head forever. It seems like Mittens actually revealed something. She even suggests Nate must have done something to ruin the pump. This is not ending well. Nate gets irritated about her accusing him, and they decide to be in separate teams for the grape-picking race. Carla meets Charles before his important meeting. She doesn't want to take sides in Nate and Frankie's tug of war. Doesn't look like it. Charles doesn't believe that a DeLuca won't take sides. It seems this feud runs deep. Carla still insists she doesn't want anything to interfere with her cordial relationship with Charles and their duties as co-chairs of the festival. Charles feels Carla is only cordial when her wine sales are ahead of him. He reminds her they have always had a mutual desire to crush each other. Seems obvious at this point. Carla now understands why Frankie wants to move on if Charles behaves like this. She feels he's contentious and short-sighted, but he's sure Frankie won't be pushed around by Nate. Carla thinks he should suggest this to Frankie himself, unless she's not talking to him too. Ouch. She knows about their internal family feud. Charles is frustrated about loans, but Tony assures him they had a good meeting. Charles thanks Tony for his help, and they're sure things will work out. Frankie is now teaming up with Joanna for the grape-picking competition. He complains about the t-shirt, but she's glad he's joining her instead of Nate. She really needs this win. We can see that. Jonah informs her that he gave a speeding ticket to Susan Jones last night. She was coming back from the DeLucas, so they knew she was planning a deal with them. It's great how fast gossip travels. Frankie sets up a meeting with Susan and asks her to see something before she makes any decision about which wine she wants to buy. She brings Susan to the place where she produces her own wine. Frankie promises to let Susan represent her if she also buys the Sorrento grape harvest. Susan has heard Frankie's ownership is in doubt and that she lacks the experience to grow a good crop. Isn't that what Marco said? Frankie assumes Nate said that but tries to save face. She knows Susan is a savvy broker, so she insists a partnership with her is much better than a one-time deal with Nate's family. It feels like the feud is back on. Susan loves Frankie's wine, so she asks her to enter it in the best wine competition. She promises Frankie a deal if she wins it. Now things are looking up. Jonah is getting late for the grape-picking relay race, where Nate has already created a separate Sorrento team with Marco. Hannah joins Frankie and her team when she hears Jonah can't make it. They all begin the competition, and Frankie and Nate are at their competitive best while picking the grapes. Frankie's team loses to Nate's by a bit. Nate still insists he's not the enemy, because he has never cared for their family rivalry. It was fun to compete against Frankie in high school, but this doesn't look good for him anymore. Frankie knows their competition will be over anyway, after the next day's harvest. Since Frankie still wants to fight, Nate decides to stay away from the farm that night. Frankie wakes up and reports smoke from a distance. The fire has spread throughout the town, so Frankie tries to spray water on her crop. Nate rushes over to help her, but they realize they need to turn on each section manually. They turn on the taps, and Nate is soon relieved as they notice the winds shifting. Their farm is safe, and Frankie is relieved he was there for her. Finally, something positive. She gets a call from Jonah and learns that half the vines at Baldwin Farms have been destroyed in the fire. She offers to help Charles, but he refuses to think of her as part of the farm. Someone's being stubborn. Nate feels bad about Baldwin Farm, but Frankie wants to focus on their competition. They started harvesting grapes to determine which one of them got more. They're exhausted with all the hard work, and Frankie makes him taste her wine. He feels it tastes like her in a bottle and is amazing. He realizes she was honing her craft while he was off studying. Frankie admits Nate was right about her disappearing before he left. When her mom got sick, she pushed everyone away and wanted to be with her. He tries to comfort her, but she doesn't understand what they have after so long. Nate invites her to the Christmas dance as a date, and she's happy to go with him. Things are surely looking up. Frankie enters her wine for the competition and watches her dad looking awkwardly. Carla sympathizes with Charles about his wine and feels another Baldwin could win this year. That has to hurt. Frankie hates competing against her dad and feels like he could use a win. Jerry announces the finalists of the competition. The winners are to be decided through a blind tasting, and Frankie is one of the finalists with the DeLucas. Marco makes fun of Frankie's wine, but Nate puts him in place and is sure she will win. The anonymous votes are all in favor of Frankie, and she receives the award. What will Marco say now? Frankie isn't happy about her victory because she feels there's something wrong with Charles. Marco drops by Hannah's parlor and reluctantly congratulates Frankie for the win. How satisfying is that? He wants a haircut, but Hannah isn't sure he wants her around him with scissors. Fair point. He asks for another chance with Hannah, but she makes him wait while she helps Frankie. Nate loves how great Frankie looks before the dance and reminds her of his moves. They're happy at the dance and are surprised to see Hannah and Marco together again. Jonah takes Frankie away in the middle, and Nate notices how stressed they look. Frankie checks with Susan about something and takes the stage to make an announcement. She thanks them for making her the best wine, but clarifies that she learned everything she knows at Baldwin Farms. Since she produced the wine when she was employed at Baldwin, she wants to recredit her Best Wine Award to Charles. Well, that's a surprise. Nate doesn't understand why she did that, but Frankie insists she needs to go back to Baldwin. He doesn't like that she's giving up on Sorrento, but Frankie claims she doesn't have a choice. She willingly hands over Sorrento to Nate. He has always loved her determination to prove herself because he knows how tough the wine business is. He feels she has won against all odds and doesn't want her to step back at this point. When she leaves, Nate asks Jonah to explain what's happening. Frankie tearfully says goodbye to Mittens and smiles when she spots the tape while packing. This is sad. Frankie turns up at Baldwin Farms, where they discuss how the soil is rocky and better for replanting. Charles doesn't like that Jonah reveals his problems to her. He admits he made bad decisions when he mortgaged the property to deal with debt. He hired Tony when he lost control of the financing because he didn't want to burden Frankie with these issues. The fire then made things worse. Frankie assures him that Susan will be buying all her winning wine and the surviving Baldwin grapes if Frankie makes wine with Charles. She knows they can turn this around. Charles refuses to accept her sacrifices because he has always regretted not supporting her. His debts are taken care of because Nate is investing in his farm. That's adorable. Nate is giving him a loan so they can keep the Baldwin name too. Charles also tried Frankie's wine after the competition and felt like it tasted honest and full of life. He has credited the award back in her name because he refuses to let her give up on her dreams and Sorrento. Carla comes to Charles with some wine and wonders if their kids know they're in love. Frankie thanks Nate for what he did for her father, but she plans to pay him back the money. Nate insists the deal is between him and Charles because it's best for all of them. No one wants Frankie to sacrifice Sorrento, and Nate claims he needs her. Nate explains that he came back to town when he realized something was missing in his life. He knew he had always been in love with Frankie when he saw her again. Frankie admits she always wanted him to come back too. He kisses her, and they decide not to check who won the competition.